Welcome to New World Now with your host, Kim Corbin. It's one thing to read or write a book that has the power to change our lives. It's another to live the principles and teachings from those books each day on a moment-to-moment basis. Host Kim Corbin's intention with each of her interviews is to empower us to do just that, as she talks with authors published by New World Library. They will discuss their personal journeys and share practical tools we can use to be more aware, mindful, and present in our daily lives. Now, here is your host, Kim Corbin.
Two things happened in my life recently that inspired me to invite the peaceful warrior himself, Dan Millman, to join me for today's show. The first was the Women's March that happened the day after the inauguration. I was in San Francisco at the time, standing shoulder to shoulder with 100,000 others in the pouring rain. And despite the extremely crowded environment and inclement weather, it was the peacefulness and positive vibe at the heart of the gathering that struck me more than anything. The march really wasn't anti-Trump. It was pro-women. And the feeling of solidarity and positive energy that I came away with left a powerful imprint on my soul. The second was an exchange I recently had with a friend on Facebook who's an enthusiastic Trump supporter. She posted an article that was indignant about something the leftists were doing, and I left a comment stating how the whole leftist-rightist thing and the articles like the one she had shared that only served to deepen the divide make me incredibly sad. Thankfully, she responded to my comment with grace, and a civil, peaceful conversation ensued despite our vastly different takes on our country's current political situation. It didn't take me long to realize that both of these experiences had activated the peaceful warrior within me, which was what allowed me to keep an open heart while at the same time taking a stand for the things I personally believe in. And I have no doubt that the coming months and years will provide ample opportunities for me to channel both the grace and inner resolve that are at the heart of the peaceful warrior way that Dan Millman has been teaching for nearly 40 years now. Dan is a former world trampoline champion, Hall of Fame gymnast, university coach, and college professor. His first book, Way of the Peaceful Warrior, which is a semi-autobiographical novel, is one of the most beloved spiritual sagas of our time and has sold 2.5 million copies worldwide and counting. It was also adapted into a fantastic movie from Universal Pictures starring Nick Nolte in 2006, which I highly recommend that you put in your Netflix queue if you haven't seen it already, but be sure to read the book first, of course. In addition to The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, Dan has written 16 other books that have been translated into 29 languages. He's been living, writing about, and teaching the approach to life he calls the Peaceful Warrior's Way since 1980, and I'm thrilled to have him here with us today. So welcome, Dan.
Well, thank you, Kim. Good to be here with you.
I thought a good place to start would be for us to have you define in your own words what it means to be a peaceful warrior in today's world.
Happy to do so. In the simplest terms, what sounds like a contradiction, how can you be peaceful and a warrior at the same time? The terms refer to all of us. So when people introduce me as the peaceful warrior, really that isn't applicable any more than it is to anyone, because all of us are seeking to live with a peaceful heart. Everybody I know. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, most of us can acknowledge there are times in our life, there are moments where we need a warrior spirit. And by warrior spirit, I don't mean a spirit of fighting. I mean inner strength, courage to face the challenges of everyday life. So I'm not cheapening or diluting the term warrior. There are people who actually put themselves in physical harm's way, soldiers, Secret Service, and so on. And I don't want to dilute that. Those are true warriors, but not all of them have a peaceful heart. And there have also been peacemakers throughout history who are nourishing, kind, loving, supportive, but not all of those have a warrior spirit. People who combine the best of both are people like Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez, of course Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, Harriet Tubman, and many others who've manifested both the peaceful heart and the warrior spirit in their own life.
So powerful and so timely. And you have a black belt in the martial art of Aikido, which is interestingly something that's come up in two of my previous podcast interviews when we were talking about offering no resistance to the way things are. So I was hoping that you might be able to unpack the analogy for us a bit by explaining the similarities between Aikido and the peaceful warrior way.
I'd be happy to. Now, I need to set a context that when I was about 9 years old, I went to a boxing class and discovered I didn't like getting hit or hitting other people. So my boxing career, it's a great martial art, but it didn't last long. So I ended up starting with in childhood with judo. And judo, the term judo means gentle way in Japanese, and it's since become a sport and perhaps not quite as gentle. But it also used the idea of using your partner's momentum. And after judo, I took karate, so I had some background in the Okinawan style karate. And then I went into a latency period. When I started training in gymnastics for 10 years, I didn't do any martial arts. So I joke with people and say I have a 7th degree black belt on the trampoline. But after my gymnastics career ended, I started coaching. I then took up Aikido. The word "ai" means harmony, and it's actually pictured in Japanese as two rivers flowing together, joining one another, merging. That's what "ai" means. And ki, Ki, is about energy, the energy and the spirit of the universe. And Do means way. So literally, Aikido means the way of harmonizing with the spirit of the universe. It's flowing. It's a flowing approach, almost a Taoist approach, even though its inception is in Japan with more Zen roots and Shinto roots. Still, Aikido is about not fighting, not resisting strength with strength, but getting out of the way, getting offline, and using your opponent's momentum to guide them where they actually want to go, whether they know it or not, and then harmonize and disable the attack without disabling or really seriously injuring the attacker. Despite any Steven Seagal movies someone has seen, which is more of a street version of Aikido, the philosophy of that particular art is peaceful reconciliation and harmony rather than, in fact, there's no aggressive attacks in Aikido. It's all about defensive movements when a force comes your way. It's also a very good metaphor, of course, why many Aikido teachers end up teaching aspects of living, because it's a great way to approach life without resistance, but using whatever comes at you to lift and to learn and making use of that. So that was an influential philosophical approach to martial arts. Later, I studied Tai Chi and some elements of the Filipino arts, and most recently, Sistema, which is a Russian martial art, one of the most intriguing I've ever studied. So Aikido is part of my martial arts background. It is the only one I earned a black belt in. So now if I'm ever attacked on the street, I can whip out my certificate.
It reminds me, just as you were talking, the phrase that you often hear of "that which you resist persists" came up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, right, we give it a lot of attention. There's another saying related to that if you resent somebody else, you're letting them live rent-free in your head. Yes. So rather than, that practice of saying yes more in life, yes, and finding a way to do that. In my brief sojourn in improvisational acting, I took a class once. It's all about saying yes to whatever situation is presented to you and going with that and kind of having fun with that if possible. Not all situations are fun, but it can be less painful when we don't resist and when we say, how can I make use of this? And in fact, there is a very high spiritual exercise, one of the highest, one of the most transcendent exercises anyone can do in any moment they tend to resist or a moment that's problematic or troublesome to them, is simply to ask the internal question, in what way might this be perfect in terms of my growth and understanding?
Yes. I love that. There's so much wisdom in the way of the peaceful warrior, some of which we'll get to today. And much of it is given to the character of Dan by the character of Socrates, who's your mentor in the book. And so I'm curious what you would say as far as how important it is for us to have mentors or teachers in our lives and or to serve that role for other people.
Well, I can say a couple of things in response to that wonderful question. First of all, Kim, we are all students and we are all teachers. Many of us can relate to being students when we're back in school studying academics, or we're taking a class from an expert, someone who knows more than we do. But often we don't necessarily see ourselves as teachers unless we play that role formally as a coach, a teacher in some field. But all of us teach by example. James Baldwin, the writer, once said, "Children have never been very good at listening to what their parents tell them, but they never fail to imitate them." And Albert Schweitzer said, "In influencing other people, example is not the main thing, it's the only thing." So we are all teachers by example, whether we know it or not, whether we appreciate it or not. People are noticing us. They're watching us, our children, our nieces, our nephews, people, our peers. They are noticing how we behave, and we can raise the bar or lower it by our example. So in that way, we are all teachers. We all influence other people, whether or not we fully appreciate that. And the other thing is about having teachers. We've all heard that kind of New Age saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But many people misunderstand that saying. They think when they're deserving enough or somehow have been initiated, then a teacher like Socrates, like my Socrates, will appear in their life. But actually what the saying means is when the student is ready, which means paying attention, the teacher appears everywhere. Mm-hmm. Every day. Most of us know this. It's not radically new information. If we're paying attention, I once learned a valuable lesson from a cloud. And I'm serious about this. I was working as an administrator. This is a couple of decades ago in a bodywork school. And I was trying to finish up on Friday afternoon and trying to write all these forms and call people I needed to. And I felt my blood pressure kind of going up, pressure rising toward my head, a pre-headache. And then I looked out the window and I noticed a cloud drifting across the sky, and I realized it wasn't racing the wind. It wasn't dawdling behind. And I found myself taking a deep breath, relaxing my shoulders and the rest of my body. And I continued with everything I had to do, got it done gracefully, and finished the day. And I didn't have to get into this stressful space. So we can learn something from a cloud, from another person, from a friend, from an adversary. There's an ancient saying, we have no friends, we have no enemies. We only have teachers.
Yum. I love that. And in Way of the Peaceful Warrior, Socrates encourages Dan to replace the search for future happiness with the practice of unreasonable happiness. So will you talk a bit about what unreasonable happiness is and why seeking ultimately doesn't work?
Well, seeking, sometimes we put that up on a pedestal. I am a seeker of wisdom. Well, that's fine to want to learn more and improve ourselves. But when we seek from a point of dilemma, life is not good enough, we're dissatisfied, whatever it is. I have people coming to me saying, Dan, I'm doing well, but maybe I haven't reached 100% potential. And I say, well, what if you have? What if you did yesterday and that's it? Now the rest is recess. We don't know this crazy making idea that we're never good enough. So that kind of seeking only reinforces the dilemma that sent us seeking in the first place. So yes. We need to really look at that and just start to accept. And people think, well, but if I accept, if I'm satisfied, won't I stop improving? I haven't seen that the case at all. I think people actually improve better when they accept where they are, rather than judging everything, because judgments only hold the patterns in place. So this whole idea of seeking, that's what I would say about that. And you had mentioned Socrates. Yeah, he was telling me about the present moment. Yes, there is no such thing as future happiness, except as a concept, because the future never arrives. It's always the future. We're either happy right now, despite our circumstances, given, whether it's reasonable or not. You see, Socrates once said there are many reasons to be unhappy. Just open the newspaper. Anybody can come up with 10 reasons immediately to be unhappy. They can
For
make
sure.
a list. But, we can also do the exercise where we write 10 reasons to be happy. But rather than try to find reasons, we can just be unreasonably happy. Just to be alive, to have the opportunity for a human life. I have a new book coming out called The Hidden School. It's coming out in June. And one of the keys to it is learning how to die so we so we can fully appreciate what it means to be alive. And I'll be teaching a 4-minute meditation in the near future on the process of dying to help us appreciate life. And I've done it for over a year, well, several years actually myself, every day. And it's had an astonishing effect over time, building up layer by layer of how I appreciate life moment to moment. Whether it looks good or bad in the moment, it's still an amazing grace that we tend to forget.
Well, it's so easy to forget, and especially these days, I think it's more than ever for me. It's important to remember that.
Yes.
Yeah. So here's another one from Socrates from the book. He says that fear and sorrow inhibit action. Anger generates it. When you learn to make proper use of your anger, you can change fear and sorrow to anger, then turn anger to action. So will you speak a bit to the proper use of anger?
Sure. Even Mahatma Gandhi, I didn't know this when I wrote the book, but years later, I saw a quote by Gandhi who said, anger properly channeled can change the world. Mm. He didn't say, don't be angry. So it's not about anger is bad, but the fact is when we're in fear has the power to hijack the brain and paralyze us. It's hard even to breathe. If we're really in fear, we startle and we just kind of freeze up like a deer in the headlights. So fear can inhibit action when we need it. And in fact, Morihei Ueshiba, who founded the martial art of Aikido, which we raised earlier in the conversation, he once said, you call it fear, I call it a call to action. So he learned to respond differently to the fear. In fact, Cus D'Amato, a famous boxing coach, once said, heroes and cowards feel exactly the same fear. They just respond differently. Mm. So many of us feel afraid at times, which is perfectly natural. I feel afraid at times, but what do we do about that? It's not about not having fear. It's about how we behave when we're afraid, turning fear into energy, into power. So it's possible even with fear, but it's more difficult. And sorrow, when we're in sorrow, it's like a second chakra. Those familiar with the whole chakra system, that model of awareness. When we're in sorrow, we tend to feel sad. Our shoulders hunch over. We may sob. It's hard to breathe out strongly. We tend to, like sobbing is like strong inhalation, but weak exhalation, like so when we're in sorrow, it's very difficult to act. We tend to feel weak and need consolation and energy from other people. But when we're angry, that can move us to action. Let me give one silly example. When I used to bounce trampoline, I'd be bouncing by myself trying to learn a new move. And I'd try it once and I'd crash. And I tried again and crash again. And I was getting a little discouraged, but then I got angry and I just punched it. I kicked it because that anger helped me get through that fear and sorrow. Instead of collapsing on myself after a couple of crashes and getting disheartened, I just said, what is this? I'm better than this. So I use that anger, and we can learn to use it in positive ways. However, anger, any really skilled martial artist knows if you get your opponent angry, you're probably going to win the match because they may come at you with a burst of energy, but then they're going to just collapse and lose it because this burst of adrenaline works only a limited time. So anger tends to also increase tension. So the actions we do when we're angry have a degree of tension associated with them, which inhibits proper physical action. So in the martial arts, we need to transcend anger ultimately as well. But it's not a bad thing. It can be used for good. Absolutely.
Right. Mm. So this is an exchange between Dan and Socrates from the book about moderation that I found fascinating. Socrates says, moderation, it's mediocrity, fear, and confusion in disguise. It's the devil's dilemma. It's neither doing nor not doing. It's the wobbling compromise that makes no one happy. Moderation is for the bland, the apologetic, for the fence-sitters of the world afraid to take a stand. It's for those afraid to laugh or cry, for those afraid to live or die. To which Dan says, but you've told me the value of balance, the middle way, the golden mean. Socrates then scratches his head and says, well, you have a good point there. Maybe it's time to trust your own inner knower, the counsel of your own heart. And I love how that interaction shines a light on the ultimate importance of trusting our own inner wisdom above all. And I'm curious what your current thoughts are about moderation in the middle way.
Well, it's been said that all things in moderation, including moderation. Of course, I'm in sympathy with the overall idea of living a balanced life, but what does that mean? Because for some people, the balanced life, for example, is never taking a really hot shower and never taking a cold shower, but always kind of a lukewarm shower. And that's not my idea of balance. I love to take a hot shower, then I always finish with a cold shower. So balance can mean exploring extremes as well, but eventually coming back to that place of balance in how fast, quickly, or slowly we speak, or move, or eat, or do anything. In fact, I'm going to be teaching a seminar in about a month up in upstate in western Massachusetts, and it's going to address the law of balance, the spiritual law of balance, and how to apply it in everyday life. But when Socrates was railing against moderation, and he was quite the character, he was doing that somewhat tongue-in-cheek. What he was talking about is, rather than just being stuck in the middle of everything, to explore the ranges of life. But yes, sure, come back to what works for us, because balance is different for each person. What is balanced exercise? For one person, it might be 3 hours a day if they're training for the Olympics. For someone else, it might be 20 minutes or 12 minutes of conscious exercise. So balance is different for each person. It's not some kind of rule or formula. So Socrates, of course, wasn't disowning the Taoist wisdom of balance, but he was talking about it as a kind of structure. And again, because it differs for each person, that's when he came back to trust yourself, find your own balance.
Yes. I love that passage. I thought it was fascinating. And here's one of my favorite quotes from the book that I'd love for you to speak to. It's a classic one, which is, "There are no ordinary moments."
Well, there's a story behind that, and it's not in the book, so I'll share it with your listeners now. I was in the gymnasium, and I did a very impressive dismount, a full twisting double somersault off the high bar, and I stuck it, which means I landed on my feet and I didn't move. Boom, I stood at attention, and it was like a yes moment. So I said, time to stop workout. Let's quit on that. So Socrates was watching me. It was just him and me in the gym. So I ripped off my sweatshirt and stuffed it into my workout bag, and I was carrying it down the hallway. He was walking with me, and he stopped and turned to me and said, "Dan, you know that last move you did?" I said, "Yeah," smiling. And he said, "Well, it was really mediocre." And I sloppy. And I said, "What are you talking about? It was the best dismount I did in, weeks." And he said, "Oh, I'm not talking about the dismount. I'm talking about the way you took off your sweatshirt and stuffed it in your bag." And a little light bulb went on, because he reminded me once again that I was treating one moment as special, flying off the high bar, and I was treating another moment as ordinary, that didn't really matter. And that's when he reminded me once again, there are no ordinary moments. To treat every moment as like a dismount off the high bar, because every moment counts. The quality of our moments become the quality of our life. Now, that doesn't mean we don't kick back sometimes, and I'll watch a video on my phone or something, or just relax, space out. We need those moments too. It doesn't mean we have to be intense all the time, every single instant constructive, accomplishing something. No, there are times a balance of rest and labor and work and pleasure and so on. But it does mean we have a limited number of moments. We have about 30,000 days from the day we're born on the average to live on the planet Earth in this lifetime. So probably a good idea to pay attention to our moments more and value each one.
Mm-hmm. We have about a minute and a half left, and so I just, for my final question, I just wonder if you have any words of encouragement or advice or perspective that you would offer to people who are feeling unsettled and nervous and kind of out of touch with their inner peaceful warrior right now, as far as what's going on in our country and the world.
Well, circumstances change all the time. The fact is, right now is one of the safest times in human history. Statistically, that is true. It's a fact. If you really look at the number of people being killed and so on in wars, the Huns, the Goths aren't riding through town. So to keep perspective, the media is designed to point out our sore spots in the world. So they pick out this happened and that happened here in the world. But if you, day to day, if you look out your window, you might see some birds singing and flying about. Traffic's going. Our days are relatively peaceful. But we're so concerned because we're inundated by all this stuff from the media. It's not a bad thing, the media. It serves a purpose. It makes us aware of what's going on in the world. But it's important for us to take a deep breath now and then and relax our body, because we have that in our control. Here and now, breathe and relax helps us to face the natural challenges of our inner lives and outer lives.
That's wonderful advice. And I so appreciate you being here with me today, and for your peaceful warrior spirit, and for your teachings, helping us all to connect with that part of ourselves. Thank you so much, Dan.
My pleasure, Kim.
For more information about Dan Millman and the Peaceful Warrior Way, you can visit him online at peacefulwarrior.com. And as always, if you enjoyed today's podcast, your 5-star rating and or review in iTunes would be greatly appreciated. I'd also like to invite you to join the New World Now podcast community on Facebook, where you can be a part of discussions about current episodes and stay up to date on the latest and greatest podcast news. Simply search for New World Now podcast on Facebook to join the group. I hope to see you there and look forward to connecting on future episodes of New World Now.
Thank you for listening to New World Now with Kim Corbin from New World Library. New World Library publishes books and audio that inspires and challenges us to improve the quality of our lives and our world. For more information about their books and authors, visit them online at newworldlibrary.com.